Hey, Marshall here to tell you about an incredibly easy way anyone who loves brewing and drinking beer can save a little bit of money. In addition to supporting everything we do here at Brewlosophy, the American Homebrewers Association recently introduced their free Brew Guru mobile app. It offers a searchable database of homebrew recipes, including popular craft beer clones and hundreds of award-winning recipes from the National Homebrew Competition. What's more, Brew Guru has a searchable map of deals at breweries, beer bars, and homebrew shops. Grab the free Brew Guru app for iPhone and Android devices today and follow the path to great beer. Over the last few years, one particular brewing method has become insanely popular among both new brewers looking for an easy way to get into all grain, as well as seasoned, experienced brewers interested in simplifying their brewing process. It's been said that necessity is the mother of invention, and when I think about the topic of today's show, that's exactly what comes to mind. Homebrewers with limited space who just want to make delicious beer as simply and inexpensively as possible. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott. And today, contributor Jake Huolihan and I are going to be focusing on the Brew In A Bag method, something we both have pretty decent amount of experience with.
Yeah, I know that I've used Brew In A Bag almost exclusively for over the last year, and it's, I think, an elegant solution to, some problems that people have with space and the ability to brew a lot. It's been pretty cool to see that rise to prominence.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because I remember when I first read about Brew In A Bag, probably I think it was early to mid 2011 or so when I saw somebody writing about it on a forum talking about people in Australia having used this method, and I just remember thinking, how the hell didn't I think of this? It seems like such an ingenious solution to the problem of one, too much gear, but also not having the space to brew. Or to store all of this brewing gear that was traditionally, quote unquote, required to make beer. And it's not necessarily my go-to method these days, but I've certainly adopted some aspects of Brew In A Bag. Jake, I know that you were doing exclusively like traditional Brew In A Bag single vessel for a year and a half or so.
Yeah, I was. I converted my system to an electric Brew In A Bag system and, cut down on the number of vessels I had, cut down on my brew day time. It really worked out well for me.
I mean, I know so many people who are using Brew In A Bag now, people who are winning awards constantly. In fact, somebody was telling me, I couldn't say the exact year it was, but that, I think it was 2016, but that the NHC, the winner of NHC in that year or 2015 made their beer using the Brew In A Bag method. So it's definitely a valid approach these days.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think I've seen pictures online of on various forums of actually professional brewers adopting this method too.
Oh yeah, for sure. In fact, House of Pendragon Brewing Company, when they were just getting their start, I think they were still back in the nano phase. They had a fabric filter manufacturer make them a ginormous, brew bag that they used for 3-barrel batches, 1-barrel or 3-barrel batches, I forget. And this thing held up. I mean, they made a bunch of great beer using Brew In A Bag. Well, we're going to get into that as well as some of the experiments that we've done on Brew In A Bag in just a minute. Hey, listen, if you enjoy having a great time with people who love brewing and drinking beer just as much as you do, HomebrewCon is where you need to be from June 28th to June 30th in Portland, Oregon. Registration is open now. This is not an ad for HomebrewCon. This is me asking you to come hang out with us because it really is one of the funnest things we do all year. Almost the entire Brewlosophy crew is going to be hanging out, recording episodes, and of course, Jersey and Tim are going to be reviewing beers live at our collaborative booth with Yakima Valley Hops, Imperial Yeast, and Mecca Grade Estate Malt. It's going to be so much fun. Remember, you need to be an AHA member to register for HomebrewCon, and you can get that all set up over at brewlosophy.com/AHA. If you're looking to pre-funk a little bit, we're not going to be doing anything special this year like we did last year, but Imperial Yeast is throwing a pre-conference party on the evening of June 27th. They're calling it Insane in the Yeast Strain, and it's open to anyone who wants to come. No tickets or entrance fee. All you do is pay for the beer that you drink. It's going to be at Imperial Bottle Shop on Division Street. Apparently, there's more than one Imperial bottle shop in Portland. So it's the one on Division Street. It starts at 6 p.m. and kind of goes until whenever. Casey from Imperial told me it goes until, quote, late. It's going to be really cool. We're all going to be hanging out there. I guess Everybody's Brewing out of Salmon, Washington is going to be making a single big batch of wort and splitting that into 12 fermenters that get pitched with 12 different Imperial yeast strains. And then they're going to be selling 3 separate flights of 4 beers for comparison. So that's right up our alley, Jake. I'm pretty stoked to be able to go and try these different yeast strains.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just HomebrewCon in general. Every time I hear about it, I get that little like pang of jealousy because I just can't wait for it to come. It's so much fun.
You're jealous of yourself in some ways then.
Jealous of my future self.
That's right. Me too. I was just talking with the folks from Imperial, and they said they'd be cool with maybe having Jersey and Tim review some beers while we're hanging out at the bottle shop and drinking those. So we got all kinds of fun stuff up our sleeve. Having used Imperial yeast extensively over the last year, I'm pretty certain the beers at this event are going to be very, very tasty. Probably is just as good as the experience is fun and interesting. Every Pitch Right pouch of Imperial yeast contains 200 billion cells of the purest yeast, ready to turn your wort into delicious beer. I am a huge fan of their L13 Global Lager yeast, which apparently is the Weihenstephaner yeast. I found that it works great at both cool and warm temperatures, regardless of the style that you're making. And they also have strains like AO7 Flagship for super clean American-style beers and A38 Juice for those hazy New England IPAs. Check them out at imperialyeast.com and come hang out with us in Portland. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. If you'd like a way to support Brewlosophy while also getting a little something tangible in return, head over to patreon.com/Brewlosophy to view a list of the rewards you can get for helping us out. For just $3 a month, you're going to have the opportunity to ask questions of some of the smartest people in homebrewing live. For those who make their pledge in March, you'll get to hang out with BJCP Grandmaster Judge and author Gordon Strong, good friend of ours. I got to hang out with him in New Zealand last year. Such a nice guy. Patrons who have been with us since February or earlier get to ask How to Brew author John Palmer questions in just a few days, March 24th. No worries if you miss it. Every live Q&A will be recorded so that new patrons can go and check them out whenever they like. You can rewatch them as much as you want. We'll keep them on our super secret Facebook page. We also have other levels with rewards, including private Brewlosophy recipes, unique discounts to Yakima Valley hops, and the opportunity to join us in a monthly video chat. Go check it out at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, and you can head over to brewlosophy.com/support to find a list of links to bookmark and use whenever you shop online. It won't change your experience at all, and we get a little commission that helps us to continue doing what we do. Finally, if you haven't yet, please consider taking a second to rate and review this show wherever it is you listen to podcasts. The feedback really is helpful. And don't forget to subscribe to the Brewlosophy podcast so you receive a notification whenever we drop a new episode. All right, if you're in search of a rad community of like-minded brewers who enjoy drinking beer just as much as they do thinking beer, consider checking out the Brew Club. Since announcing this thing a couple months ago, over 400 people from around the globe have become a member. That's crazy to me. Seems like so many. It's managed by a group of homebrewers dedicated to learning more about beer and brewing. The Brew Club is totally free. They've got a forum set up for folks to chat, and they're currently talking about setting up regional meetups, which I think sounds like a lot of fun. Really cool stuff. To learn more or become a member, you can go over to thebrewclub.com. That's thebruclub.com. All right. Jake, we've got some feedback here. From Greg Jones, who lives in Thousand Oaks, California, in regards to the show where we discussed lager fermentation temperatures, he asked, are you still cold crashing everything? I'm a new brewer and don't have a temp-controlled fermentation chamber, but would love to do some lagers and Kolsch-style beers. Is this possible, or do I need to cold crash at the end?
So I think you and I probably differ here. I really don't cold crash. I have 2 fermentation chambers. One doesn't have the ability to chill. And I noticed not cold crashing in that fermentation chamber really wasn't having any negative effect on my beer. And then just the concerns about suckback and potentials for oxidation just kind of made me cut that process out of my my standard brewing setup.
Yeah. I don't think it's necessary, Greg, to cold crash. I still do sometimes. And I think we should, I mean, all beers ultimately end up getting cold at some points, but what we're referring to is cold crashing prior to kegging the beer or to packaging the beer. That's what I'm presuming, at least. Kind of like you, Jake. I've been kegging my beers warm lately and then letting them cool down once they're in the keg, only to avoid the potential of that cold side oxidation, which we have found may in fact negatively impact beer, or impact beer. I guess it's up to each drinker to determine whether that's positive or negative. So yeah, do you need to? No, not really. I do think that there's, like, when I do cold crash in primary, I found that, cold crashing and adding gelatin in the primary, I do keg clearer beer, and that, so I'm, from the point of kegging, I'm drinking that beer sooner, which a lot of people might be interested in. So it really is up to you. Try both methods. If you can't do it, don't worry about it. All right, if you have any show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com, and we'll try to get to it on an upcoming episode. So I cut my craft beer drinking chops up in Bellingham, Washington in 2002. Right after I turned 21, I started going out to the only craft brewery in town, which was Boundary Bay. Of course, nowadays there's like umpteen great breweries, including one of my favorites, Chuckanut Brewery, up in that area. But in the year or so before I got married and moved to California, Boundary Bay was all I had. And one of the beers my roommate Nathan and I would guzzle regularly was their deliciously rich Scotch Ale, or what the BJCP now refers to as a wee heavy. As much as I enjoy the style, I rarely brew it, which made me all the more excited to taste the version homebrewer Ryan Rupp sent in for review.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Plummy. It's plums.
All right, I'm going for it.
Are those tears of joy?
They're not tears of joy.
sadness?
It's interesting. Not bad.
I like it. Oh, dude. I can't wrap my arms around. I don't know what it is.
I don't have anything either.
It smells different than it tastes, than it looks.
Yeah, has a very strong aroma.
It's like unobtainium. It's a rare element.
A little peppery.
It's a sipping beer.
Yeah.
I don't think I can.
It feels like a
I
big
can
beer.
house it. I can house it.
Oh yeah.
I can't house it. It's good. Dude, I like it. It's kind of good. Hang on.
It's not bad. It's peppery to me a little bit.
Is it high in alcohol content?
It
It feels
seems
like
like
it's
it
very
is. It
high in
seems
alcohol
like it
content.
is.
But it's almost got like a coffee flavor in there.
Not to me.
Plum and
But-
roasted
but what do I
plum
know?
coffee. Roasted plum coffee.
Oh, nailed it.
Like if you roasted up some plums and then put that in coffee.
Delicious.
You like it?
It's
You
not
think
bad.
it's delicious? It's growing on you, isn't it?
It is growing on me.
I would drink this.
I would too. It's peppery though. That's like the third time I said
Roasted plum with a little misting of pepper, a little grinding of pepper. You finished it. Well, I mean, you can't say you didn't like it if you finished it.
It's good.
As learned men, we know that to be true.
It's not my go-to, but it's good.
Yeah, dude. I give it a solid, not my go-to, but I would drink it. I kind of liked it.
Definitely.
So I tasted this beer before Jersey and Tim, something I try to do because I don't want to be influenced by their amazing reviews. And I wrote down my impressions. No joke. The third descriptor on my notes is plum. Jersey nailed it. Ryan's wee heavy was very good. I perceived a completely acceptable caramel flavor with just a hint of spice. Totally what I kind of expect in a well-made Scotch ale or wee heavy. All of this melded really well with a slight warming from the 7.5% ABV. Ryan mentioned he'd been aging this beer for a bit before sending it in, which perhaps lent to some of that balance. But all in all, it was a great beer. We had no problems finishing our glasses. And I just want to say thanks so much for sending that beer in, Ryan. It was a joy for us to drink and to review. If you want to have your beer or any other fermented beverage you make or feel like picking up and sending in to us, reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. Thank you so much for sticking around with us so far. We're going to be right back with a bunch of talk about Brew in a Bag. Shopping for brewing supplies online can be a real hassle, which is why we recommend Love to Brew. They've got great prices, super fast shipping, and they carry exclusive products like East Coast Yeast, the Brewer's Essentials brand, and their award-winning beer recipe kits. They're also the only place you can pick up your very own Brewlosophy recipe kit. The numbers don't lie. Love to Brew has hundreds of 5-star reviews, and thousands of brewers are choosing them for their supplies and ingredients each year. Experience the difference at lovetobrew.com. That's love, the number 2, brew.com. The best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world. Find everything from classics to modern favorites, as well as cool experimental varieties and a vast array of ingredients and gear at yakimavalleyhops.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste time chilling work, which is why I use cleverly designed immersion chillers from Jaded Brewing. After some bad experiences with counterflow and plate chillers, I began the search for a more efficient chilling solution and discovered Jaded. That was nearly 4 years ago, and to this day, I continue to rely on the King Cobra and the Hydra to chill my wort in record time without the setup or cleaning hassle of other chillers. If you're looking for a way to optimize your brew day, I can't recommend Jaded chillers enough. Go see what they have to offer at jadedbrewing.com and let them know Brewlosophy sent you. Founded in 1978 by brewing pioneer Charlie Papazian, the American Homebrewers Association is a division of the Brewers Association focused specifically on protecting and promoting the hobby of homebrewing. In addition to their work lobbying for the rights of homebrewers across the country, they're also the primary sponsor of brewlosophy.com. By joining the AHA, not only are you supporting their cause, but you get a ton of benefits as well. Discounts at breweries across the U.S., early access to tickets for events like the Great American Beer Festival, and you get to attend HomebrewCon, the world's biggest gathering of homebrewers. Head over to brewlosophy.com/AHA now to sign up to become a member. Before the Brew In A Bag method really caught steam, mesh bags, or fabric filters as they're referred to nowadays, in my mind were used for two things in the brewing process: holding crushed steeping grains when brewing with extract, or containing hops during the boil. When I heard about people using a fabric filter as their main lautering device, my initial thought was that it was super clever. Jake, walk us through what exactly Brew In A Bag is and where this idea supposedly originated.
So Brew In A Bag, as people use it in the homebrew community, is referring to a mash method in which the brewer places their crushed grains in a fine bag. Typically we say fabric filter, but I believe there are a few other types that work well with it. But after mashing is complete, the grains are removed from the wort and allowed to drain until it's fully drained. This differs from a more traditional setup in which you mash the grains in a separate vessel and the wort is removed from the grain. So that louder step between Brew In A Bag and a more traditional setup is really what we kind of define as the difference between Brew In A Bag in a standard 2-vessel setup or 3-vessel setup.
Right. It seems like with Brew In A Bag, one of the big benefits is this move from, traditionally 3-vessel was what it was. You had your hot liquor tank, you had your mash tun, then you had your boil kettle. And then with the advent of kind of like batch sparging and whatnot, it moved it down to 2-vessel. And it sounds like Brew In A Bag is really, the big thing behind that, or what was the initial, I think, appeal to a lot of people was that you could take care of it all in one kettle.
Yeah, exactly. It's a single vessel brew setup. So you have your boil kettle, you mash in your boil kettle with those grains in that bag, and you remove the grains from that, and you just start your boil. It's nice and simple.
It really is. It doesn't get much more simple for all grain brewing. In fact, it was with Brew In A Bag where I started rethinking this idea that extract brewing is easier for beginning homebrewers, and I'm not sure with the sticky mess that extract brewing can create. I'm not sure that's the case these days. It might take a little bit more time to brew an all grain Brew In A Bag batch, but. Yeah. So, but yeah. So where did Brew In A Bag come from? I know there's a lot of talk about Australia when it comes to this method.
Right. So I did a bit of digging, via Wikipedia and some Aussie brewing forums to try to find out the origins of Brew In A Bag, and really, there's no real consensus on it. What seemed to be the most consensus was a person named Patrick Hollandale, who went by Pistol Patch on the Aussie brewing forums. Really kind of helped Brew In A Bag rise to prominence, and he kind of outlined early steps in terms of how to brew in a bag, in the equipment you need, and really what to do with that. And I thought that was pretty cool. It seems to be invented by homebrewers, which is always fun.
Brew In A Bag is definitely, for the most part, it's definitely a genuine home brewing method. It gets, once you get up past probably bigger than 3 barrels, it's kind of an unreasonable approach. But I know, in The Joy of Homebrewing, written by Charlie Papazian, he kind of outlines an approach. I forget what he calls it, but it's like a 2-bucket approach where one bucket has a bunch of holes drilled in the bottom. You put your grain in there, you steep your, you steep your mash, you steep the grains in there in the hot water, and then you remove that one bucket slowly and it drains out. It seems like Brew In A Bag kind of took that idea and put a flexible kind of container around those grains and made it even easier than what Charlie was talking about in The Joy of Homebrewing.
Yeah, exactly. In trying to figure out, how logically somebody came to Brew In A Bag as like a viable setup, I really thought it was either from Charlie Papazian's diagram of the two buckets, or like what you said, bags used for steeping grains. Well, why not just get a bigger bag and steep all of those grains?
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, totally. So some of the benefits of Brew In A Bag, when we talk about that setup, really it allows for lower equipment startup costs. So instead of buying a standard 3-vessel system or a 2-vessel system if you're batch sparging, which is a decent outlay of money to make that jump from extract brewing, really this allows you to just take your kettle that you have potentially from extract brewing. You might need a larger one if you've been extract brewing small batches, but just using that one kettle and using a fine fabric filter and really keep those costs down to get started in all grain and see if homebrewing is something that is going to stick for you as a hobby.
Right. That is such a practical benefit to this method. Like, regardless of the impact it has on beer quality, which we'll get into a little bit later, this is such an easy avenue into all grain homebrewing for anybody interested in making beer at home. You can do it at any batch size. I mean, I know people who brew in a bag 1 gallon batches, and they're brewing 1, 2, 3 batches a month because it's just so easy on their kitchen stove.
Yeah, exactly. And some additional benefits to Brew In A Bag. It allows brewers to crush their grains with the finest of crush without fearing a stuck sparge, or using adjunct heavy malt bills without the use of rice hulls, because you're removing those grains from the wort. You're not going to worry about getting stuck as you're trying to remove that wort from the grain.
Absolutely. Yeah, anyone who's ever experienced a stuck sparge, whether batch sparging or fly sparging, you know how big of a pain in the ass it is. And I've done it. I made a rye pale ale 5 or 6 years ago that had 20% rye malt all milled up, and I was doing batch sparge, and it clogged my stainless braid. It took me, I think just to collect my sweet wort took me about an hour and a half because I had to keep gently scraping my tube. So Brew In A Bag completely eliminates that as a risk, which is really cool. In fact, I just saw a Twitter post, I believe, from Rex, who owns the Brew Bag, saying that they've mashed malt flour basically in a bag, and it worked out fine. So you can really put the crush on that grain.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of along with that stuck sparge and, taking an hour and a half to lauter your wort, Brew In A Bag really cuts down on transfer times and makes for an overall faster brew day. I think when I moved from a more traditional 2-vessel style system to exclusively Brew In A Bag, I think I cut about 30 minutes right off my brew day right there, which is great for people with kids, people with families who want to homebrew but need to fit it into, some kind of confined time frame.
Yeah, I mean, just the cleanup alone of a dual vessel versus a single vessel brewing setup is going to save you. That's one less thing to clean. The bags are super easy to clean in my experience. I flip it inside out, dump the grain right in either in a bucket to give to some chickens, or in my green garbage can, and then I just spray it down, let it dry off, and then whack it off and put it away. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure there are many other benefits that, people are screaming into their headphones that we're missing. But one of the last ones I put down is squeezing the bag decreases losses to absorption. Right. So really, it's going to increase your brew house efficiency because you're having less losses throughout the entire brewing process, which is a benefit to some people.
Absolutely. And that's one of the big benefits that I know a lot of modern Brew In A Bag brewers talk about, is that they're using less water. It's not significantly less in my experience, but they're using less water because they can squeeze more of the sweet wort out of that grain, which I've heard claims also can improve extraction on some level, not by many points, but so you can see higher mash efficiency as well for some reason. I'm not sure how true that is, but an increase in both mash and brew house efficiency, that's kind of a benefit for a lot of people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure if we had done this podcast a few years ago, some of the drawbacks to Brew In A Bag that people commonly talk about might be more out there. But largely, Brew in a Bag has become an accepted, viable method to brew great beer. People have been winning medals doing it. People have been doing it for years. The one drawback or potential downside to Brew in a Bag is if you're using that finer crush. Some people claim can increase the risk of tannin extraction. There are probably avenues around that by controlling your mash pH and things as such, but that does seem to be one drawback that's commonly talked about with Brew in a Bag.
When Brew in a Bag, when I first started reading about Brew in a Bag, 7-8 years ago, that wasn't so much talked about, the whole finer crush thing. It almost seemed like as people started to experiment with this method and use it more often, they realized they could crush finer, which would improve their mash efficiency. And then the whole tannin extraction thing became an issue. But in the beginning, as far as I recall, Brew in a Bag, no one was talking about using a finer crush in those first few years. It was just like, hey, there's this new lautering method that's super easy and really cheap, and it works, and then you started to get this talk about, well, hey, Brew in a Bag seems to lead, since it's a no sparge, generally a no sparge or full volume mashing method, meaning that there's just no rinsing stage. You're using the full volume of water for the mash. It typically led to a slightly lower mash efficiency, and so people realized by crushing finely, we're able to improve that mash efficiency. And then came along all of these concerns and these worries about extracting tannins from, shredded grain husks and all this stuff. I don't know. In all the reading and all the research that I did prior to Brew in a Bag being a thing, tannin extraction was always an issue with mash pH and primarily in fly sparging. So I'm not sure where this, how the fire got lit on this particular fear.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, somebody has a 10 grain 3-vessel setup and is brewing beer that's comparable to somebody with a $50 Brew in a Bag setup. I can see where some bias could come into play, and here's a risk. Who knows? People
seem to like to worry, though. I mean, I say that generally, not just about home brewers, but we seem to kind of focus in on the potential bad sides of things before we just accept the positives. I guess we kind of want to, I don't know, it's kind of like risk aversion.
Yeah, totally.
There do seem to be other concerns that people at least had back then. Maybe some people still hold it. And all of them seem to revolve around this idea of tannin extraction. One of them has to do with squeezing the bag as well, right? I mean, wasn't that like an issue when people started to advocating for squeezing?
Yeah, absolutely. Squeezing a bag is compressing those grains with that finer crush. You're compressing what is more exposed husk material. So it's logical that that's a concern from some people.
I guess it's logical. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine, at least in my mind, before we started messing around with our experiments with this, like having the strength, to squeeze out tannins, but maybe it's possible. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? But Brew in a Bag has been around for quite a long time now, or handful of years. That it has spawned some variants or some offshoots of the method. The first one, and one that I think quite a few of us use here at Brewlosophy, is mash in a bag. So mash in a bag, typically we're referring to using a standard 2 or 3 vessel system, where instead of using a false bottom or a toilet braid in the mash tun cooler, you're using the same bag that people are using for Brew in a Bag, just as your lautering filter when brewing with the 2 or 3 vessel system. And it works out great. We love to use it. Makes cleanup easy. You can just pull the bag out of there. All your grains are in there. Dump them into your garbage can or into your backyard for chicken feed, and just spray out that bag the same you would for Brew in a Bag.
Yeah, this is the method that I've adopted over. I think I've been doing it for the last 3 years or so. And people ask, like, why don't you just do regular Brew in a Bag, or why don't you just use the old, toilet stainless braid that you used to? Well, it's partially because I like how easy cleanup is with Brew in a Bag, which some people are going to argue. But or when using a fabric filter. But when I did the single vessel Brew in a Bag, two big issues that I had were maintaining mash temperatures in a single ply stainless steel kettle was very difficult for me. And I don't generally concern myself too much with mash temperature stability, except for that we do a lot of experiments. And so that's important for me if I'm brewing 2 batches side by side, to ensure that the mash temperature is consistent. So what I found is that by using a brew bag, I don't have to Vorloff. Using a brew bag in my mash tun, I don't have to Vorloff anymore. Wort comes out crystal clear as soon as I open my valve, and it just works really well for me. Cleanup is a cinch. So that, mash in a bag, if that's what we're going to call it, MIAB, that's certainly what I prefer as a brewing method.
Yeah, mash in a bag is definitely become my favorite method for home brewing. Like you said, all the same benefits that you said. Going along with mash in a bag, something that we've adopted, no sparge brewing. I'm sure no sparge brewing had been around prior to Brew in a Bag, but really Brew in a Bag seems to have given it a rise in prominence. I think most of us are no sparge brewing, and that's the practice of putting all of your hot liquor into the mash to begin with, and having no sparge step, which is great. Some other variants that aren't necessarily Brew in a Bag variants, but kind of follow in that same vein. Brew in a Bag, Unibrow, Grainfather, systems like that, where you're mashing with mostly the full volume of the liquor. I think the Grainfather does have a sparge step, but you're removing those grains from that single vessel and brewing in the same vessel that you're mashing in.
Yeah, and you think about the Grainfather. I believe they are headquartered in New Zealand, but I can't help but wonder, like, to what extent the advent of Brew in a Bag, single vessel Brew in a Bag, like the traditional approach, didn't sort of inspire, these other folks to consider single vessel brewing. Like you said, Grainfather has a sparge step, but it's really easy. And same thing with the Brow Supply Unibrow that our contributor Matt Del Fiacco uses. Is you basically lift a basket, which takes the place of a bag, out, and then rinse those grains off into the kettle, and you're brewing a batch of beer in a single kettle / vessel, and it's working incredibly well. You've got thousands and thousands of people around the world who are now using this, which I just, it seems to me like it was probably on some level influenced or inspired by, this simple Brew in a Bag method.
Yeah, it's funny. These the people in Australia and the people in New Zealand are coming up with ways to make brewing easier and less time intensive, and it seems like the systems we see coming out in America are to make it more glitzy and more pro-like.
Which are, and I'm going to call that complicated. I was talking with somebody, I wish I could remember who it was, a while back, and they came up with some idea. It was just some home brewing setup idea, and ran it by me, and I it was this 3-vessel, 4-pump, just crazy convoluted setup, and I just said, man, there's no way I would ever want to brew on that. I don't know if I'd be home brewing today if it weren't for a lot of the things that have come out in the last decade that simplified all grain brewing. And Brew in a Bag is definitely probably the most simple approach and most influential approach that's come out in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my setup, when I initially went to Brew in a Bag, I included pumps and included a recirculation step, and it just kind of didn't make brewing fun for me. There was that cleanup afterwards, cleaning the pumps and doing all that stuff, and just the simplicity of Brew in a Bag, I think, is really where the main benefit in it lies.
Yeah, I agree with you. And getting back to some of the kind of the criticisms of Brew in a Bag and the critiques that it received when it first became a thing, I actually remember, and it's just amazing to me that people as cool as homebrewers would say stuff like this, but I remember people complaining that, well, it's just not brewing. It's not like real brewing. You're not doing, all you're doing is simplifying a process so that it makes it easier, but that's not brewing. Brewing is 3-vessel, or brewing is this. You have to sparge. You have to do all this. Almost in a way like berating people who chose this, this particular method to make beer that was ending up being pretty damn good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So weird to me. Well, as the popularity of this very simple method has grown, it seems a lot of that original criticism has been quieted. Of course, we're still curious. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the Brew Bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the Brew Bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a Brew Bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
A few of us having adopted primarily brew in a bag type methods as our primary mash method, we were curious as it relates to some of the common wisdom around brew in a bag and how it would hold up to being tested in our traditional triangle test. So I designed the first brew in a bag type experiment, comparing squeeze versus no squeeze. So like we said earlier, I moved to an brew in a bag system and did that exclusively for about a year and a half. And one of the most common practices that I wasn't really looking forward to with brew in a bag is the squeeze step. So I designed an experiment to test that out. So the squeeze step is really a common practice among brew in a bag brewers, and that's once the grain is removed from the wort, the brewer will allow it to drain, so it gets most of that wort out of the grains, and then squeeze the bag to decrease grain absorption and get more of that sweet wort that's caught up in the grains into your vessel.
Right. The ultimate goal there is to get to that pre-boil volume. And I think most of the calculators that are out there now, or recipe design software that's out there, I know it's true for Beersmith. You can actually go in and set your equipment setting to brew in a bag, which decreases the grain absorption rate from other methods.
Yep. Some of the opponents of squeezing argue, like we had talked about, that it increases tannin extraction, or that you're somehow removing an undesirable compound left in the grain. That grain bed does act as a filter in a traditional 2 or 3 vessel setup. And opponents would argue that by squeezing that, you're not allowing the grain to really act as its filter, and you're taking some of those compounds that may be better left in the grain and putting those into your wort and ultimately into your finished beer.
So squeezers are essentially just abusing their grain and they're like using their grain just for the sweet wort. They don't view it for its more they don't see the deeper side of milled grain.
Right. They don't see the feelings of the grain. So with squeeze versus no squeeze being kind of a decisive topic in the community, we designed an experiment to test that out. Since the grain absorption rates would be different, each mash would be mashed with a different amount of water to keep gravity as controlled as possible. So I brewed my house bitter recipe that I had been developing over the course of a year. One batch was mashed with slightly more water, and the grains were just hoisted up out of the kettle upon finish and allowed to drain. There is some natural squeezing action when you remove those grains from the kettle. I use a deer pulley to remove those grains from my kettle. So as it does pull out of there, it is compressing a little bit, but it is certainly compressing less than squeezing. So in the second batch, it was mashed in with slightly less water and hoisted out until it had dripped fully and no more wort was really dripping out of that. And then I had a friend over that day, and we took turns squeezing that bag full of grain until no more wort came out.
Tag team sack squeezing is what it sounds like to me.
It was not fun for me. I prefer kind of like a cleaner, more controlled setup, and I trusted the grain absorption rates that I'd put into BEERsmith, and they did end up, accurately predicting how much wort I would have, but just not knowing, like, when is this going to stop running? Are these two going to be equal? It gave me some concern, but, ultimately we sat there and squeezed it, I think, for about 10 minutes and got a little messy, a little sticky on the hands.
I think a key thing to remember when listening to us talk about this particular experiment or when reading about it on the site is that both of these batches were brew in a bag. We really tried to isolate just the effect of squeezing the bag. And so like you said, lifting that bag out, the weight of that wet grain is naturally going to kind of have a compression kind of squeezing effect. But the other one was still in a bag as well, and you squeeze the living hell out of it in order to achieve the same exact pre-boil volume with hopefully the same OG.
Right. And that's how it did come out. After that squeeze step, we boiled it, added the hops, chilled it down, measured the gravity, and they did come out to be, I believe it was within 1 point of each other. So BEERsmith did do a very good job predicting those grain absorption rates for squeezing versus not, which was kind of validating.
Yeah. I've had the same experience when doing traditional brew in a bag and using BEERsmith and other calculators. That grain absorption rate, it seems to make sense in there. So before we discuss the results of this experiment, Jake, what were your expectations? I know you'd been doing brew in a bag for a while and you weren't squeezing. Did you have any preconceived notions as to what might come out of this?
I really didn't. Like you said, I wasn't squeezing the bag regularly. Just logically for me, I didn't really see the vector for tannins because, mash pH was controlled. This was a full volume mash. But, I was curious. I was open to being wrong.
Yeah. Well, and if squeezing did in fact impact tannin extraction, we would hope to see, or almost expect to see, that these beers would be reliably distinguishable by a panel of participants. I know you collected data from 27 different participants, which would require 14 of them to accurately identify the odd beer out in the triangle test in order for us to say that there was significance. However, only how many got it right?
Only 8. Which is slightly less than 1/3, which means we could not say with any confidence that participants could reliably distinguish a batch that was not squeezed, brewing with the brew in a bag method versus a batch that was squeezed using the brew in a bag method.
If people were just randomly guessing in the triangle test, we'd expect 9, give or take, to get it right, to choose the right one. That's exactly 1/3 of 27. Only 8 people got it right. So based on mouthfeel, aroma, and flavor, tasters could not tell these beers apart. I think the more interesting aspect of this has to do with, despite the fact that they couldn't tell these beers apart, there was something different about them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So when it came time to go and get data on this one, I was actually kind of surprised that tasters could not tell them apart because since kegging those beers, and I used a highly flocculent English yeast strain, and I don't believe I find this one with gelatin, but that yeast strain, dropped out right away, just given the nature of English yeast. However, the squeezed batch maintained a permanent, some sort of haze compared to the other non-squeezed batch, which was pretty brilliantly clear pretty quickly after kegging.
The difference is very noticeable in the photos that we have up on the site. And it was I think the thing that kind of got me is that I know of people who brew in a bag. I'm not sure necessarily how hard they're squeezing or if they really do like a full-fledged 10-minute, tag team sack squeezing thing like you did with your bud. But they're producing beers fined with gelatin, a lot of them, I'm sure, or other post fermentation findings that are coming out, commercial brightness. So the fact that you saw this kind of hazier thing with the squeezed bag batch really did kind of tick something in my mind. And I found it especially interesting that tasters just couldn't tell them apart based on flavor and aroma.
Right. So while it seemed like squeezing was doing something to the beer to produce some sort of different haze from not squeezing, it did not seem to rise to that level where it was affecting flavor, mouthfeel, aroma enough that participants could tell them apart. And again, both beers were brew in a bag in this method, so perhaps they were more similar than different. It
makes me wonder if maybe there was like a polyphenol thing that got extracted from the squeezing, or maybe if it was something from the bag. But ultimately, kind of in the end, it's kind of like, if you don't care what your beer looks like, or if you're okay with a mostly clear beer and you want to squeeze and get that efficiency out of it, then it would seem, based on these results at least, that you could probably get away with it and make a beer that's qualitatively at least, in terms of taste and flavor, no different than a non-squeezed batch, which is pretty cool. Well, real quick, before we get to the next experiment, I want to tell you all about Brewers Hardware, who specializes in tri-clover compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique and hard to find items for both the homebrew and craft brewing markets, including high quality stainless fittings at competitive prices and very fast shipping. These are the folks that came up with the quick, clean, take apart ball valve that I've been using for the last 2-3 years. Super cool. It's like an NPT tri-clover hybrid that's super easy to clean. Brewers Hardware also offers in-house welding for those who live near their shop in Huntington Beach, California. Check them out at brewershardware.com or give them a call at 714-891-1150, and be sure to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. So with this first experiment done on squeezing, our contributor Ray found down in Southern California, he began to wonder, well, really, I think it was a friend of Ray's named Wes, who they noticed some differences between Wes's Brew in a Bag beers and Ray's no sparge beers, where he uses an MLT. And so they designed an experiment to test this one out.
So for this experiment, like you said, I think Ray and Wes had been brewing, the same beers using the same recipes for a while. And it seemed to both of them that Wes's beers would always come out, less bitter than Ray's. Maybe not quite as clean tasting. So Ray and Wes designed an experiment to test, a traditional brew in a bag method as much as possible compared to Ray's standard 2-vessel. And he does not use a brew bag in his standard 2-vessel. He just uses a false bottom on that.
And so this really was more a test of mashing methods.
Exactly.
So Ray wanted to compare standard non-fabric filter, using a typical false bottom in a insulated mash tun versus your typical traditional brew in a bag, single vessel system. And that's what they did. They used all of Ray's equipment. They brought it, they were in Ray's garage. They brewed these two batches at the same time. And what all was different about these two batches, given the different, the methods that they used?
So since Ray was, doing a traditional 2-vessel versus brew in a bag, that brew in a bag batch would be squeezed, as is kind of standard practice. I know some don't do it, but for this, we're calling that standard practice for brew in a bag. So the brew in a bag batch did have slightly less water, similar to my experiment, because the grain absorption rate for brew in a bag is much less than using a standard 2-vessel system. So both were mashed in. Ray did not recirculate or heat up the brew in a bag batch at all. He simply insulated it with some blankets he had lying around, which caused the mash temperature to drop pretty significantly throughout the course of the mash compared to the standard 2-vessel brew system. And this is something I know I've experienced using brew in a bag without applying heat to it. Like you said earlier, that standard single ply steel is not really a good insulator.
Every single time I've done brew in a bag, whether I use a Reflectix wrap or put blankets around my kettle or whatever, I definitely lose more heat than when I'm using an actually insulated mash tun. And so the way we viewed this was, and a lot of, when we published this article, a lot of people, that was the big complaint. Well, obviously mash temp was different. Well, first off, all of our mash temp experiments have been non-significant. So I get it. I get the argument. But at the same time, we viewed this mash temp drop as a function of the variable, which is mash method. The idea being somebody who does a traditional brew in a bag method to make their beer, that's probably what they're going to experience. And what did he lose? Something like 8 or 10 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that?
I think it was, between 6 and 10, somewhere around that.
Which is what, like 3 or 4 degrees Celsius? Really not that much.
So he brewed these two batches. They came out to, roughly the same original gravity. I think the Brew in a Bag beer was a point higher. So again, BEERsmith's absorption rates and calculations, pretty spot on. However, the final gravity between each of these batches was a little bit more different. So the final gravity for the Brew in a Bag beer came in 2 points lower than the 2-vessel beer, which we probably viewed as a function of that dropping mash temp, allowing for a more fermentable wort. So these beers were fermented out, kegged, and served to 25 participants. At a sample size of 25, we would need 13 correct answers.
And before we talk about how many actually got it right, we had the pleasure of talking with Ray from the point he packaged these beers and started tasting them all the way through his data collection process. And Ray was pretty convinced, if I recall correctly, Jake, Ray was pretty convinced that these beers were different.
Yeah, he sent us pictures throughout the process of the Brew in a Bag beer being significantly hazier. I know Ray is one for hyperbole, and I think he, talked about the Brew in a Bag beer being, gross, just having a sharpness to it that he didn't like, and I think he was pretty confident this would be a significant result.
Yeah, well, and they they had come up with this term, Wes and Ray, that they refer to as the Wes IBU. Ray would brew a beer, some hoppy blonde ale or something like that, and it would have all of the expected bitterness levels or perceptible bitterness and that crispness and all of that. And then Wes would go and brew a similar beer, and Ray would drink it, and it would be kind of that bitterness would be more muted. It wouldn't be as crisp. It would be kind of I don't think dull is the right word. Because apparently talking with Wes, it sounds like he was able to compensate for that just by, adding a bigger bittering addition. But there was this difference, and they'd come up with this term, the Wes IBU. And Ray was telling us before he got all of the data collected that it seems that this had it was true. Like this Brew in a Bag beer the one that he made did taste slightly like it had like a slighter or less bitterness. It wasn't as sharp. It wasn't as crisp.
Right.
So out of the 25 people that he collected data from, 13 would need to identify the unique sample in a triangle test in order for us to say that it was reliably distinguishable, that there was a difference. And 14 people were able to do so. So one more than we needed, which allows us to say that on, for these two beers, these participants who did not know what the variable was, were capable of reliably distinguishing a Brew in a Bag made beer from one made using a full volume, no sparge in an MLT method.
Right. These results were, fairly interesting. It made me wonder what it was about Brew in a Bag that was causing this difference. And similar to my experiment, Ray's Brew in a Bag beer that was squeezed, it maintained a significant haze throughout the time he had those kegged up, which I believe was about 2 months.
Yeah.
The standard 2-vessel one dropped clear pretty quickly, while that Brew in a Bag one did maintain that haze similar to my squeezed batch.
Yeah, he had mentioned to me that even after, he travels a lot for work, and so these beers weren't being consumed as quickly as they might if he were home all the time. He still had some on tap after we published the article, and he kept doing these comparisons, these appearance comparisons, and he said it took about 2 months for the Brew in a Bag beer. And remember, this was a squeezed Brew in a Bag method, to kind of start catching up with the no sparge full volume batch, but that like in the pictures that I saw, you could still tell that the Brew in a Bag beer did have considerably hazier appearance than the no sparge beer.
Yeah, absolutely. So
makes me wonder if it has, the key in the squeeze experiment that you did was that both batches were basically identical with the exception of squeezing the bag. Whereas in this one, the variable being mash method, one beer was made using a bag while the other wasn't. And in this one, the results did come back significant. It makes me wonder, and this probably far-fetched, but like, is there something that the bag is contributing to the flavor and aroma and mouthfeel of these beers that might actually be, having an impact?
Yeah, I don't know. We did discuss that a little bit in discussing this, and I think we all came to the conclusion that probably not. But I'm definitely open to that possibility and something we should test out. Yeah.
I mean, it just, I guess what we would have to do next, like a follow-up experiment would be, a brew in a bag, in a mash tun, the way that I do it versus not using the bag at all, just to test the impact, if there is any, of an actual fabric filter. But I think a key, something that we need to get out there when we talk about these significant experiments is preference. Because a lot of people wonder, well, which one was better? If the squeezing made it hazier, does that mean that it didn't taste as good? What were the preference ratings on these beers?
I believe the preference ratings for this one were 7 preferred the 2 vessel and 5 preferred the brew in a bag. So really, in a few had no preference or didn't note a difference. So really split. Like we see in many experiments.
Exactly. And that to me is such an important point, that regardless of what we're talking about, and we like to test this stuff out, just because we're able to show in a single experiment that tasters were capable of reliably distinguishing the unique sample, that doesn't speak to what you might like, what each individual brewer might prefer on their own. It could be that you're one of the folks who is able to tell these apart, and you like the character that you get, that smoother, maybe maltier character that you get from a squeezed brew in a bag batch, or maybe you like the other one, and that's okay. That's the fun in brewing, is you get to test it all out for yourself and choose on your own.
Right. And if you're squeezing your brew in a bag batches and they're not coming back hazy and you like that, go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing is maybe a future, combined variable experiment is doing squeezed versus non-squeezed and comparing the impact gelatin has on either of those. Maybe you'll get that crystal clear beer if you just fine with gelatin or biofine or clarity firm or one of these other finings. Perhaps that's all that needs to be done to make it, again, align with the non-squeezed or the non-brew in a bag version of a beer.
Yeah, these 2 experiments have really kind of opened up the avenue for quite a few more follow-ups, and I'm pretty excited, given the fact that I had used brew in a bag for quite a while, to go back and test these out. So, in kind of summary, what do these 2 experiments mean? So twice we've observed now that squeezing the grain bag seems to produce a haze or more haze compared to a control beer that isn't squeezed. Again, if that's not the results you're getting, take with that what you will, but we've now observed that twice. Also, while squeezing a standard brew in a bag was not really distinguishable from not squeezing a brew in a bag itself, and again, this is just one experiment, one data point, did seem to produce a qualitatively different beer. That difference doesn't mean better, doesn't mean worse, but it does seem to produce a different beer.
Right. And if, in my opinion, if haze is the issue, keep in mind that neither of these experiments did we use any post-fermentation fining. So it could be that's your fix. I don't want people to get too hung up on that. Jake, what are what's your plan at this point? You were doing single vessel brew in a bag for a long time. Did these results have any impact on your approach?
So they did. And we ask that question a lot, and often it's, it made me think about it more, but this one actually, did make me make some changes. So I had been practicing brew in a bag for, about a year and a half, moved to a single vessel setup, and just not wanting to recirculate to, keep mash temps, seeing that mash temp drop that we have talked about, really this was kind of the tipping point, seeing raise 2 beers, that one that maintained that haze. And, I'd been observing, some haze in my beer that seemed to linger longer than prior to using my brew in a bag setup. So I did use these results and kind of my experience that I was having and went back to a more traditional cooler method, insulated mash tun. And again, kind of like what you said, we're doing these experiments. I can't be really seeing a mash temp drop that's not controlled between two batches as a potential cause for another variable being into a batch I'm trying to brew. So I moved back to those insulated mash tuns, and they've been working great. But I still love Brew In A Bag. The benefits were awesome. I had a kid about the time I switched over to Brew In A Bag, and that significant time savings, really allowed me to keep brewing as much as I'm brewing, while still having time for, a baby around, my wife and family, and wanting to do things outside of brewing, taking up a whole day on Saturday.
Yeah. Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're actually doing mash in a bag now. You're still using a brew bag in your MLT?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't think I'll ever go away from a fabric filter unless maybe we have, a few experiments that show that fabric filter is reliably distinguishable from using a false bottom.
Yeah, if we find out that the fabric filters are what's causing purple New England IPA, I'm done with it. Yeah, that's my promise. Well, I'm doing the same thing you do. I absolutely love using the fabric filters as just as a loudering device. To me, it makes sense. They're cheap. I think you can get them for like $30 or $35. In fact, a sponsor of ours is the Brew Bag, and you can use a code. I think it's TBP17 to get a discount on your first order from them. So if you're looking to kind of simplify your brew day, I just can't see the argument against doing it. It makes so much sense to me. My response to how this has impacted me is it's kind of twofold. As the experimenter, when I'm doing formal experiments, and particularly when I'm doing two batches side by side, yes, I absolutely do still use a fabric filter, but Brew In A Bag doesn't necessarily fit what it is that I'm looking for, which is consistency. I use these big stainless infusion mash tuns, but I do put a bag inside those. They hold temperature really well. I can brew two batches side by side and consistently predict, temperature loss. It's the same in both, and that is really important to me. I don't want to be brewing two batches and having mash temp constantly be, an extraneous variable that we have to account for. That being said, when I brew short and shoddy batches, almost all of them, not every single one, but almost all of them, I do use the standard Brew In A Bag method, and I love it. The big issue for me is that with my setup, I can really only lift about a 5-gallon batch of spent grains out of my kettles before it just becomes too much of a hassle. I do have a pulley. But I've even found with that, it worts dripping outside of my kettle and it kind of becomes a mess. But if I can lift that bag out, my short and shoddy batches, hour and a half, 2 hour brew days using the Brew In A Bag method, and they're coming out really, really well. I mean, we recently did an IPA. I recently published an article on a short and shoddy American style IPA that was delicious, brewed using the Brew In A Bag method. And I squeezed, and that beer never dropped super clear, now that I think about it. But I'm a big fan of the approach in general. I have a local buddy who is the assistant brewer at House of Pendragon Brewing Company, who still uses the Brew In A Bag method and has got his start in homebrewing using the Brew In A Bag method. He's won so many awards. He took first place in a local BJCP competition with I believe it was a Scotch ale or something like that he made using the method. So it is a viable, completely valid method that I think is a fantastic way not only to get into all grain homebrewing, but also if you're looking to simplify your process and cut out some time, I mean, by all means, Brew In A Bag.
Absolutely. I think it's the best entryway for new brewers to get into all grain brewing and seeing if they want this hobby to stick.
Amen. And I'm all for extract if you want to use extract, but if you're looking to, really dig your fingers into the grist, as it were, Brew In A Bag might be the best way for you. Well, if you want to read about the experiments we discussed in this episode or any of the other fun stuff that we're up to, you can head over to brewlosophy.com and find it there. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
off the morning with some hot tea. Lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.